All right, we are recording.
So we are excited to have you, Dr. Eric Gentry. Welcome to Building Resilience podcast.
It's a privilege to be here. Grateful to get to do it. Yep.
Awesome. Why don't you take just a few minutes to tell us a little bit about yourself and tell our audience who you are, and go from there.
I'm a psychotherapist. I've been in some type of practice working with trauma. I'm in my 38th year of doing that, so a long time. I've gotten old as a trauma clinician, and I worked in private practice for a lot of years before I did my doctoral work, and then I started my doctoral work in 1996 at Florida State. Went there to work with Charles Figley, who was one of the kind of founders of the field. And he was my dissertation chair, and I did an assistantship with him. And he and I started the very first traumatology institute on the planet at Florida State in 1997. And that stayed operational until 2001, and it wasn't making enough money for Florida State, so they were going to close it down. And I took it to University of South Florida, where it became the International Traumatology Institute. And then the same thing happened, in academic politics with that, and that kind of dissipated. And in 2009, I and two other clinicians, we started the International Association of Trauma Professionals, and ran that till 2017 when we sold that to PESI. And lately, for the past 4 years, I've been involved. I was a co-owner for several years of the Arizona Trauma Institute, and now am the CEO and director of the Forwardfacing Institute. So I've been training clinicians and treaters of traumatic stress for well over 20 years. And that's kind of what I do mostly. I still have a practice and still work with trauma survivors, but mostly I'm doing I do writing and training with other professionals.
Right. And I think that's where Heather and I stumbled across you, is that you were still at the Arizona Trauma Institute, and we took some courses there and became just like, your work was just so incredible to see how you have moved it to writing your Forward-Facing Trauma book and to starting up the therapy and the coaching. And so we're excited to have you. And I feel like I'm almost like a fangirl, because I've watched your videos. I've learned so much from you. And Heather and I are going through your training, and it's amazing. We, as we've mentioned before, and our audience knows, we're also speech pathologists, and we've worked with people who've had traumatic brain injury. So we spent a lot of time working with people who are suffering with PTSD. And as I mentioned in our conversation earlier, a lot of the people that we work with now, they don't have PTSD, but they often are still dealing with a lot of stress. And I was hoping that you can share with us, just give us some background on what actually is trauma. Why is it important for all of us to understand what trauma is?
Well, that question's sort of like asking, what's a fast car? And when you compare, a 70s Pinto with a late model Corolla, then that's a faster car. But when you compare that with a Jaguar, then it's not as a fast car. And that's kind of depending on whose writing you read of what trauma is. If you look at the empirical definition of it, it's PTSD. It's meeting criteria, all the diagnostic criteria for PTSD. But Francine Shapiro, with her kind of advent of EMDR and in the early 90s, what she was noticing with treating the folks with EMDR was that there were a lot of people that were having symptoms generated from subclinical, things that would not meet criterion A, which is actual or threatened death, serious injury, or sexual violence. Like it didn't climb to that threshold, but it was still something that was painful, and it was producing symptoms here in the present. So she kind of stratified that between uppercase T traumas that meet criterion A, and then lowercase T traumas that are any experience that intrude into the perceptual system of the present, causing somebody to perceive threat. And when you cook down what traumatic stress is, there's a lot of factors to it. But the simplest way to understand what happens after a person experiences trauma is that memory during the time of the trauma, it gets encoded with a lot of energy. And it's all sensory. So it's all encoded with the smells, the sounds, the images, the feelings in the body. So what happens is anytime in the future that a person encounters a situation that's any way similar to that situation sensorially, it smells the same, it sounds the same, it feels the same, then it activates that memory, which then intrudes into the perceptual system, usually subcortically, usually unconscious, but it is in the perceptual system. So the person is looking through a pair of glasses of fear as that all comes forward, and they perceive threat here in the present where there is little or no danger. I mean, if you want to kind of really get to the essence of what traumatic stress is, that's the cause of it, is the perception of threat where there is little or no danger. And, then what happens is, all the autonomic functions then go haywire from there. And that's what generates all the symptoms for all of our clients. So that's a simple explanation of what takes me an hour to do in the certification course. I did that in like 2 minutes, I think. Yeah.
Perfect.
Well, I was just going to say we took the certified clinical trauma specialist course, and burned in my brain is when healing trauma, it's simple but not easy. Simple but not easy. I find myself saying it all the time.
But that simplicity has been a long time coming, because, in the 90s, it was not simple. It was really complex. And we had all kinds of these different warring ideas. And my work over the past 20 years, and not just me, but a bunch of people, is that we've been able to cook that down and show that when you complete 4 therapeutic tasks, you no longer meet diagnostic criteria. And that's what all the effective treatments do, is they complete those 4 tasks. And, one of the things that I'm excited to talk to you guys about is how that it does not take a licensed clinician to be able to complete those 4 tasks in somebody's life.
Right.
That while all the evidence-based treatments used by clinicians do those things, there's also a vector to be able to do that peer-to-peer.
Well, sorry, Leah, I was gonna ask the next question, which is, in your opinion, what's the difference between therapy and coaching? Because I know there's different stages that you've mentioned, and the top tier, or I guess the bottom tier, however you look at it, is the coaching piece.
Well, let me do that in 3 strata instead of just 2. Because there's psychotherapy, there's coaching, and then there's our forward-facing coaching, which is kind of a hybrid of both of those things. So psychotherapy it's a medical process right now. It is something that is it is an intervention designed to treat a particular disorder, a particular diagnosed condition, which is then it's in an allopathic model, which means that we diagnose the problem and we use a treatment that has demonstrated scientifically that it's effective for that particular condition, and apply that particular treatment. And that is in essence what psychotherapy is. I will refrain from getting on my soapbox about that right now.
You can get on it for a few minutes.
I will here in a second. I will want to talk to you a little bit about salutogenesis and how that applies as a new paradigm for working with especially with traumatic stress, to move it out of the allopathic medical model into something that is much more catalytic and accelerated and ergonomic for trauma survivors, rather than this whole kind of diagnostic pathology paradigm that we're working in. But to answer your question, coaching in its kind of essence is non-directive. It doesn't have an agenda. It's not trying to teach anything. It's not trying to get anybody to do anything. It's just it is to help the individual to clarify and to operationalize their goals. What they want to get. So there's not particularly a health component to that, that the coach is attempting to underneath build the process of of health for them. It's really just about goal attainment. It's about moving the person towards where they want to get, the things that they want to accomplish, even if those things might be, a little bit self-destructive or not healthy. It's still, when I'm working as a coach, I'm their employee, helping them to navigate through their own personal roadblocks and helping them to become more signal and less noise, and being able to become more efficient in their pursuit of what it is that they want to do. And then we've developed this whole process of forward-facing coaching, which is resolving the negative effects of trauma without treating them. It is in essence what we do is how deep do I want to unpack this? The reason why people breach their integrity is because they are perceiving threat, like I talked about. They're perceiving threat all over the place. And as a result of perceiving threat all day long, what happens is that our bodies activate and build energy. There's lots of energy. That energy is for an animal in danger to have the stamina and agility to either become aggressive or evade the danger, to either attack or evade the danger. Well, mostly we're not in real danger. It's just perceptual stuff. It's ego threats all day long. But what's happening is our sympathetic nervous system is getting more and more jacked up. And when the energy in our body, if we're constantly perceiving a threat and not regulating it, then our brain functioning, the part of our frontal lobe that manages all that energy, is going down. Yeah. So if we stay in a situation of perceived threat without interrupting the physiological threat response in our body, the energy gets too high and our brain functioning gets too low. And against our will, we will act out with aggression or avoidance in those situations. Mm-hmm. We either become snarky, passive aggressive, or becoming even overtly aggressive, angry with our words, or we'll skirt and try to get out of that situation. Right. Involuntarily. We're not doing that. It's not a decision. It is a compulsion because we're trying to escape the situation that we perceive as threatening. And that's all happening intuitively and instinctually. Right. Well, the way that we treat trauma is that we help people to begin to confront those situations that they're in habitual breach of their integrity, either by aggression or avoidance, commission or omission. Like if they're, habitually snarky with their partner, or they yell at their children, they're doing that because they have too much energy in their body, not because they have a moral failure. It's right. Just that there's too much energy and too little functioning of the neocortex. Well, what heals trauma is the ability to confront, to do exposure to either the memory or triggers of the memory, the sensory things that we perceive in the world, in a body that's relaxed. So that's called reciprocal inhibition, and you can't have stress in a body whose muscles are relaxed simultaneously. Those two things cannot coexist. Yeah. Once you bring a relaxed body, you don't have traumatic stress anymore.
Yeah. Yeah. Which is fascinating. And I know in the podcast we talked, if people want to go back to, I think the episode, I can't remember the episode number, but it's called Getting to Calm. And we talk about that when you are stressed in that response, first of all, your frontal part, you're not going to be able to access your prefrontal cortex. You have to move to calm. You have to move before you're able to do anything. And once you're in calm, you're not in stress. You can't be stressed while you're in that relaxed body, like you said. So just for people to go back, they may want to re-listen to Getting to Calm.
And, to take a broad view of that is in the 20th century, we believed post-traumatic stress to be a psychological problem. Mm-hmm. What we've learned in the 21st century, it's a physiological problem. It's a physiological over-adaptation. There's too much energy in the body. Once you help a person to dissipate that energy in their body by discovering involuntarily constricted muscles, that, when they're, as one of my clients says, when my shoulders are making out with my ears, and I'm able to drop those back down, I'm able to intentionally release the constricted muscles in my body because I've been in a threat response, then I interrupt that state and I don't have traumatic stress for the next few moments.
Mhm.
And the more that the person is able to catch and interrupt that threat response throughout the day, the less and less and less they are affected by the traumas of their past. So it doesn't take an advanced degree to teach people to relax the muscles of their body.
No.
It does not take an advanced degree to help people to confront situations that are scary but not dangerous in a body that's relaxed. And the more they do that, the less they are going to be affected by the trauma, but in the coaching process, we're not talking about the trauma. We're talking about them living a much more intentional life, more principle-based life of being who and how they want to be. And what it takes for them to achieve that is they have to confront all those high demand situations that they previously have perceived as threatening in a body that is downregulated and relaxed. And the more they do that, the more that they heal.
So do they,
Simple,
are there,
not easy. Sorry to interrupt you.
yeah,
Yes.
that's right.
I love
It's
that.
exactly
There
what
it
I
is.
said. So are there situations though where you do have to go back and sort of relive the trauma to work through it? And, or, I mean, because that's how we've always seen it. Like even just, I was watching a TV show the other night and they were talking about somebody who had PTSD and going into therapy and having to relive those experiences and confront them and move through them. Is that change then, you're saying that?
Well, yes, it has. Because in the 20th century, that's all we had.
Right.
Was that we had imaginal exposure, which was taking people back to their memories. If I saw in 1998, if I saw somebody that came to my door and they were an adult survivor of childhood sexual abuse, what we were doing in the first 4 or 5 or 6 sessions was preparing them to do memory work.
Exactly.
We didn't get informed consent. We didn't, it was just what the paradigm prescribed that we had to do. But over the past 10 years or so, 12 years, 15 years, there's been an increasingly burgeoning body of literature and clinical understanding that we have this other post-traumatic stress condition called complex PTSD, which is a really different animal than simple PTSD, where simple PTSD comes from single incidents like combat or natural disaster or motor vehicle accident. That's a single incident, but mostly that's not what we're working with clinically. Mostly we're working with people that have ACE scores, aversive childhood experiences. They have thousands of traumas
Right.
throughout the course of their development. And what we've learned is that all of those narrative approaches of where we sit people down and have them tell the story of their trauma just doesn't work very well. It actually causes harm for people who have all of that that developmental trauma that alters their identity, and they have a lot of struggle with relationships and not being able to function very well. Trying to take them back, it diminishes their ability, what ability that they have to cope previously is it diminishes it even more. So what we've learned is that we've had to do more and more what we call in vivo exposure with those folks, where we are helping them to get in relaxed bodies through self-regulating their own autonomic nervous system, and then being able to confront those situations. So, if a person was let's pick one. A person was in captivity, throughout some time of their childhood by their parents put them in the closet or something, and they were really afraid of closed spaces. Mm-hmm. Then, clinically, what we would do with that person is not take them back to their memories first. We would help them to find spaces that they could go in and be enclosed for a little while, that they were in control of it, and they could do that in a relaxed body. And the more that they're able to confront situations that are similar, that scare them in a body that's relaxed, what's happening is that they're lessening. The next time they're in that situation, the intrusion from the past is a little less intense. So it desensitizes that whole process. That's what happens, is the more that trauma survivors can go forward in a body that is relaxed and confront, the myriad of perceived threats that they have during the day, then the less and less and less they're being affected by the trauma. So that has become, at least for people, I think, who are on the sharp end of what's happening in the trauma field right now. When you look at people that specialize with treating complex PTSD, Janina Fisher and Peter Levine and Pat Ogden, and some of those folks that have written a lot, Christine Courtois and Marilyn Cloitra, those folks, they're really kind of eschewing imaginal exposure and replacing that with a kind of lifestyle living of trauma healing by helping them to practice this capacity to interrupt the threat response by relaxing their muscles more and more and more. And the more they do that, the less trauma they have, the more clear they're thinking, the better they function. So we don't have to wait till we get the trauma work done for the person to have better quality of life. It happens immediately, and it's pretty steep curve for a whole lot of people to get better pretty quickly. But what we've now had to insert in the treatment process is what I've called in our new book a mid-treatment assessment, where all the symptoms of PTSD, which are there's 4 groups of symptoms, and those are called intrusion. Those are flashbacks and nightmares. Avoidance, which are avoidance of people and places or thoughts and feelings associated with trauma. Negative alterations in cognition and mood. Now that's all the kind of negative perceptions of the world, that is dysregulation in their nervous system, that is distorted perception of oneself, all of those impacts. And then arousal and reactivity are there's 20 of those symptoms. Well, what's cool is that the avoidance, the negative alteration in cognition and mood, and the arousal, stress symptoms can all get treated with a therapeutic relationship, relaxed body, and cognitive restructuring, psychoeducation. So we teach people how to think better, get them in relaxed bodies, and help them to be able to change the way that they think and the way that they act. It can be all treated with that. But if they have criterion B symptoms, which are flashbacks and nightmares, that requires exposure. That requires either confronting the memory or confronting situations in the present that have sensory similarity to the memory. So if we help them in the front of treatment to confront those situations in vivo, in the environment, in their lives, and then we check them out in mid-treatment and see how many, what's happened with their symptom level of criterion B, of flashbacks and nightmares. If they're still having florid flashbacks and nightmares, then that means that we give them a choice. I mean, what I do today and what I advocate is, if they're still having flashbacks and nightmares, I want to say, well, what do you want to do about that? And they go, well, what do you mean? And I say, well, we got some choice. We can keep doing what we have been doing. And that seems like it's improving somewhat. And it would be my prediction that if you keep doing it, it's going to continue to get better, albeit a little more slowly than if we want to go back and just knock it out, if we want to just resolve it. What would you like to do? So we give them that choice once they've been able to develop these skills and practice them. Because for me, I'm not willing to do any of that work. I'm not willing to do EMDR or hypnosis or take people back into the memories of their trauma unless they first can relax the muscles of their body. So we got to do that on the front end anyway.
Right.
And so we're helping them do that first, and then checking and seeing if, and for 60% of my clients, and I work mostly with complex PTSD, we never go back. But for 40%, we do have to go back and do a movement desensitization or a narrative processing or some somatic work or something, little bigger guns to resolve that the effects of that trauma.
And
I hope that made sense.
Yeah, no, that totally does. And that's where the therapy would come in.
That's where that's a license. That's the bailiwick of a licensed clinician. You bet.
Yeah.
So during the pandemic, I've been doing a lot of telehealth. And so, what I tell them is that I will help you to heal your trauma, but we're only going to do it in the here and now.
Right.
We're not going back. If you want or need that, you're going to need to consult with a clinician in your location, or you would need to come to Phoenix and work with me. Right. If you want to do that. So for me, I just won't do uncovering.
Virtually.
in telehealth, except in very rare cases when I'm working with other professionals and they're really stable. But mostly I want to be in the same room. If I'm going to be unpacking trauma, I want to be in the same room with my clients. But that's my overprotective bias.
Yeah.
Probably a good bias to have.
I think so. I'd rather err on that side.
That's right.
Well, and it goes back to, the most important predictors of positive outcomes, which I loved because I can definitely relate to the relational aspect. And I think you said 75% of the part that we as clinicians can control is relational, and the other
That's
part
right.
is tools. Yeah.
And, when you look at that compared to Scott Miller's research on how much better we think that we're doing than we are really doing, we perceive mental health professionals perceive them to be themselves 65% more effective than they really are. That's a huge parallax. Yeah, that's huge. So, every clinician thinks they have a good therapeutic relationship, so they don't address it. They build it at the beginning and then let it go. And what we see is that it actually deteriorates. And that's why, if you've done any of my training, I just strongly advocate that there's an ongoing feedback process where we are continuing to ask our clients to negatively evaluate us on what we're missing relationally, so we continue to repair any of those things, little tears in the relational fabric, little things that we've done that have irritated our clients, that we're repairing those consistently, so the therapeutic relationship continues to get better over time, which produces much better outcomes. You bet.
Yeah, that was my question of what makes a good therapeutic relationship. Like, what are some of the criteria? Is it just having that connection, getting that feedback, asking for the feedback?
Yes. And to back all of that up, I say something in some of the trainings that I do, that it kind of, I can watch clinicians when I say it in a live training, they kind of look at me and it's a start. And I say, I am absolutely certain that most of client crises are a result of clinician anxiety. That
Really?
mostly client crises are clinician caused.
And clinicians who are not able to self-regulate.
That's right. That's right. Because if you're in a jacked up autonomic nervous system, then your clients cannot sustain connection with you.
Right.
That it becomes so painful because they're reading, all this is happening subcortically. Stephen Ford just says, every relationship is a neural exercise. I love that. That's just geeky as can be. But that's what in the 21st century, we're now kind of saddled with the responsibility of managing this whole underneath that in the 20th century was never even talked about. I mean, co-regulation was not part of the lexicon of treatment in the 20th century. It's now essential. I mean, I think that the most important intervention that a clinician can do with a trauma survivor is to be in a parasympathetically dominant nervous system while they're sitting across from them, that they're consistently repairing themselves back to a relaxed body. And when I do that, then I leech the charge out of my clients. They start being comfortable. They have, 2 or 3 sessions of that. They have their first ever experience of feeling safe in the context of another human being.
Right.
That's the outcome of co-regulation, is secure attachment.
And I guess you can translate that too in things like a parent-child relationship or relationship outside of anything therapeutic, that, to be able to co-regulate with your child, especially if your child is going through something.
That's right.
To be able to calm yourself down. I know that based on how jacked up I can get with my kids. I wish I had this.
Simple, but not easy.
Simple, but not easy. Sometimes we see, and that's our tendency, right? We see one of our kids having, seen getting all jacked up, and what's our response? To yell at them to stop it. And we would do much better to learn how to regulate ourselves and help them regulate themselves.
And to put that in a forward-facing frame, what's likely happening is some of your developmental trauma in that situation is intruding into your perceptual system, causing you to perceive whatever your child's doing as a threat. And you are now, that's probably a lowercase t trauma, but it's still intruding. It's still producing that all of that threat response, and it's still making you act in ways that are violations of your integrity.
Right.
So as you are able to relax into those situations with your children and bring your behavior into intentional instead of it being reactive, then not only are you having a whole lot better quality of life and having, self-acceptance and self-compassion as a parent and liking how you're doing it, not only all that stuff, but you're also healing the trauma of your development all in real time without ever thinking about it, without ever talking about it. It's just becoming less and less and less and less intrusive the more you confront those situations in a body that is relaxed.
Mm-hmm. Because most of us have some of that small t trauma in there, developmental. Most of us are carrying around, we may just not be aware of it, but we're reacting. And
I think that's an inaccurate statement.
oh, okay.
I would say that we all do.
Oh, okay, good. I was like, really? Because I think everybody has need. I'm like, you must have trauma. We've all had trauma. I'm giving my kids trauma.
So reeling that all the way back to what I said before is that, in the broadest aperture of what a trauma is any painful learning experience that produces perceived threat in the future.
Right. And,
the way I illustrate that is one day in junior high school. Do you guys have junior high schools there in Canada?
Yeah, close. Middle school.
Middle school. Okay. One day in middle school taught most of us to perceive other people's judgment of us as a threat.
Mm-hmm.
And that happened in one day.
Yeah. So imagine.
And, all of us ran into the mean girls.
Yeah.
And, all of us got humiliated and ridiculed through our even the most popular of us, as we navigated through middle school, we had a lot of painful learning in that situation, and that got encoded. So the next and future times we're in situations that somebody's evaluating us, you can bet that we're perceiving threat in those situations, even if we had really good parenting.
Right.
That's going to have produced any painful learning. I mean, think about when you stub your toe, if you're going to the bathroom at night and you stub your toe on a piece of furniture, and the next night you walk, that same sensory, you are much more careful with foot placement. You didn't even think about it, but you're much more, your foot placement is much more delicate. And that's the way that was a painful learning experience, that once you're in the same sensory place again, that was encoded at the same time you stubbed your toe. That's coming forward, causing you to perceive threat while you're walking through your house. Mm-hmm. And that's how that works evolutionally. Yeah. It helps us to adapt to a dangerous world. But it's just that the problem is that us human beings encode all of those social experiences too as painful. And so we've got all of that social metric now. 95% of the perceived threats I encounter through the day are about your judgment of me. They're not about, tigers and flying reptiles and that type of stuff. It's all about what will people think about me? And I'm pretty constantly around people, which means that I'm pretty constantly in a jacked up autonomic nervous system that if I don't regulate, I suffer.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Which shows the importance of everybody learning how to regulate, whether you have, the big T trauma that everybody refers to. It's if you're human, you need to be regulating, hundreds of times a day. I know in your book you talk about it's not something that's ever really going to become automatic. It's not like you're going to be able to sit back and, oh, good, I've learned how to regulate and I'm good for the rest of my life. It's a constant thing.
That's right, because you have a high volume of painful learning experiences, and you are consistently putting yourself in situations where there are sensory similar encounters in the present to those painful past learning situations. I mean, how many painful learning experiences do you have in the context of other people? Yeah. I mean, it's a myriad. It's thousands, tens of thousands. I don't know. It's a lot.
Yeah.
And how frequently are you interacting with people during the day?
Mhm.
you know, and our nervous system is Joseph Ledoux talks about in his most recent book. It's really cool, the difference between fear and anxiety. And what fear is, he calls it the high road, and the circuitry for fear goes through the frontal lobe, which means we're aware of it. You feel fear, like I'm afraid of driving on the road at night, and you can feel that. But their anxiety, he calls it, is on the low road, and that circuitry is all subcortical, which means that it never gets to the frontal lobe. What's that mean? That means that most of our threat responses are happening in our body, completely beneath our awareness. We don't know that we're having threat responses throughout the day because we've learned to live dissociated from it. We stay in our heads, we stay involved in the environment, so we're not even aware. I mean, I can't tell you how many clients that I've had come in and see me, and they'll sit in front of me with their leg bouncing up and down like that, saying, "No, I feel great. I'm not stressed." And you know, a bouncing leg means they're so jacked up they can't even contain how much energy is in their body. It's involuntarily leaking out. That's what that is. But they don't feel it. They don't have awareness of it.
They haven't labeled it.
Not even labeled. They don't know it. Truly, they don't feel it except for the outcome of it, which are the symptoms, which are the GI symptoms, which are the headaches, which are the irritability and all of that stuff that it produces. But what we do in forward-facing coaching is that we teach people to begin to develop this capacity called interoception, which is the ability to feel your body in real time. And once you feel your body, then you can discover, do I have any muscles in my body right now that are involuntarily constricted? And right now, yes, I do. My shoulders are, my belly is, my pelvis. And what's lovely about that is once I become aware that those muscles are constricted and I release them, as I did just right now, I am in a body that is comfortable. 100%. I am comfortable inside of my skin right now. I wasn't 20 seconds ago because I was all caught up in talking to you about all this stuff. Yeah. I didn't even know that I was having a threat response. But as I turned my attention away from you and into my body, I discovered I was having a threat response here about, you know, what you're thinking about me, what your audience is going to think, you know, all of that stuff was all happening unconsciously. But as I attuned to my body and I interrupted the threat, discovered it, and then interrupted it, is I returned back to being able to be comfortable. And when anybody who works with trauma gets their head fully around that every single one of our clients who have been suffering for years with traumatic stress is 1 second away from being able to be comfortable inside of their skin, that's pretty profound. You just can't get it cognitively.
That's right.
You have to shift your gears out of your thinking into your body first. And once you relax the muscles of your body, then what happens is your neocortex reboot, and you get back full functioning. People that have racing thoughts, I say, hold on, and they try to stop their racing thoughts by thinking, you know, and that's like, they just go faster on the hamster wheel. When I say stop, hold on a second, take just 10 seconds to do the wet noodle, which, you know, I talk to just
we've shared Dr. Gentry's wet noodle.
Just completely relax and soften the muscles in your body all the way down for 10 seconds. Then I count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. What's happening with your thoughts? And they go, nothing. And I say, cool, look at how that works. That's how you interrupt racing thoughts, not with thinking, but getting out of the threat response. Right. Because when you understand what happens with the brain is when you get jacked up, your brain now shifts into protection, self-defense. And the structures that you need to think are offline, and the structures that save your bacon are over-functioning when there's no real danger. Relax your body, you get back your neocortex, and you're able to now do what is required for thinking, which is constructing language. Right. For people that are having racing thoughts, what's happening is it's old language intruding, constantly intruding, trying to get them out of the situations, trying to save them from a danger that's not real.
Hmm.
That's amazing. Thank
It's
you.
kind of cool. It's exciting
It's
to watch
cool.
people.
And I know a lot of our clients have racing thoughts. It's a
Oh,
common
they
thing
do.
that people will talk about,
Mhm.
anxiety and racing thoughts, and just to know that there is relief 1 second away, just 1 second away by
And
relaxing your
your
body.
racing thoughts aren't pathology.
Mm,
They're over adaptation.
Mm.
You're perfectly adapted to a situation where there is real danger. It's just that there's not any real danger here.
right.
So you got too many weapons and too much armor for a situation where there's just nothing that's really dangerous.
Yeah.
And if there's nothing really dangerous, hello, you don't need a threat response.
Right.
So chill.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Uh-huh.
That. Thank you.
Interrupt that. Find yourself back to comfort. And you cannot have stress in a body whose muscles are relaxed.
Mhm.
Mm.
That just keeps being so simple and consistently elusive for me.
Mhm. But not easy. Simple. But
That's
not
right. That's right.
I was going to say it's such an effective tool, though, because it puts the individual in the driver's seat. There are many things in the world that we can't control, but this they can. It's very empowering.
Mhm.
And I sometimes say with my tongue in my cheek to my clients, I say, and I do that part in the training where I ask you, what do you perceive to be the causes of your stress, and they
Right.
have all those external things,
Yeah.
and then I tell them that these are not the cause of your stress, and take them through a process to help them to learn that it's their painful learning associated with each one of those things, that it's turning your threat response on and keeping it on, and that's what's causing all the distress.
Mhm.
And so, when people start to learn that the way that they've been trying to manage their threat response is to control the world,
Mhm. And you can't control it.
and
I
and it
found
ends
that
up
out.
you end up being one of Marty Seligman's doggies, getting shocked all the time without the ability to do anything about it, and it just ends up with becoming demoralized.
That's right.
And so once my clients learn that, and they start telling me that they're suffering a little bit, and I say, well, isn't it a good thing that you are suffering while you are trying to control things that are beyond your control? Because why would you stop if you weren't?
Mhm.
So let's get your attention and energy focused on something that you have the power to control while you begin letting go of those things which are beyond your control. I think that's maturation.
Yeah.
Mhm.
I
Yeah.
think that's a good definition for maturation, is me having more and more signal and less noise, that my energy and attention is focused where I have the ability to change things.
I
Right.
love that.
Yeah.
Mhm.
It reminds me of the Viktor Frankl quote in your Forward-Facing Trauma Therapy book.
Okay. Well, anytime somebody tells me that they are reminded by Viktor Frankl by me, that I will take that as the greatest compliment, because know that I introduce him in my training as somebody who's more my father than my biological father.
Mhm.
But I think that the quote that you're talking about is between stimulus and response, there's a
That's the one.
space.
Yeah.
That's it.
And in that space is our power to choose our response. And in our response lies both our growth and our freedom. And when you think about people who are trauma survivors, whether that's capital T or lowercase t traumas, is they have no space.
Yeah.
They have stimulus that is paired directly to the threat response. Somebody says something snarky to them, and the space collapses, and they're immediately in a self-defense behavior. There's no space in there. Stimulus, immediate reactivity.
Mhm.
And what teaching people self-regulation to interrupt the threat response does is it puts the space back in there.
Right.
So they can have the stimulus. Somebody says something critical to them, and they can go, oh, wait a minute. How do I want to be
Mhm.
Right.
when people are being critical of me?
Mhm.
I want to get down there and roll around the mud with them. See ya. And
Mhm.
now I can become intentional instead of being who my painful past experiences have programmed me to be. Once you start getting some space between stimulus and response, you can start being who you choose to be.
Mhm.
Mhm.
And I just think that might be the most triumphant thing that a trauma survivor can do.
Absolutely.
Mhm.
And as we're wrapping up here, I know that as part of your training and in your book, and I know that you have another book coming out, you do talk about, the learning how to self-regulate and then creating that intentional living. Can you talk to us a little bit about, I know you have your code of conduct and mission statement, and these are, as I said, Heather and I went through your forward-facing, the me part, where it's the group. And we were able to write our own code of honor and mission statement. And that is really powerful. I actually have it hanging right in front of me over there, that every single time I am going through, I know I was thinking I'm going to have to like laminate or something. And I look over to it often, how do I want to be? Who do I want to be? So maybe if you just walk us through a little bit about that process, because I think it will be really helpful for people. They can start thinking about it on their own.
Yeah, the subtitle of the book that I published in 2016, the one you're talking about, the title of it's Forward-Facing Trauma Therapy. The subtitle of it is Healing the Moral Wound. And there are multiple types of moral wounding that happen with trauma. There's an acute moral wounding of that Ronnie Gentleman way back in the late 80s wrote about shattered assumptions. It's where you lose your safety in the world, you lose your trust, you lose hope, that all of those things get shattered when you become traumatized if you weren't before. But the more insidious process of the moral wounding is people finding themselves consistently wanting to be one way and then acting in violation of their integrity, that they cannot trust themselves to be who and how they choose to be. And people believe that to be moral weakness. They believe that there is something damaged, broken, afflicted with them. And so what we do in the forward-facing process is we first teach them to interrupt that threat response and then help them to start to discover that the reason why they're breaching their integrity in situations in their life is not because they're morally weak, is because they have too much energy in their body. They are having too much of a threat response, which is compelling them to self-defend in situations where there is no real danger. It's only perceived threat. And so what we do is help them to write a covenant or a personal mission statement and a code of honor. Covenant is your purpose on this planet. Why are you alive? Code of honor are the principles that define your behavior, the points on your own moral compass that you choose. And then what we do in the coaching process is help them to find the places they're in habitual breach. Where do they act in ways that are violations, habitually violating their integrity, either by aggression, which is commission, they're doing something they don't want to do, or by omission, avoidance, they're not stepping to something that they want to step to. And we help them to walk into those situations in a relaxed body. And they come back to the next session lit up, telling me about how they were able to have a conversation with their husband and that it didn't devolve into an argument, or how that they sat on the bed with their 5-year-old reading the story to them, and they looked over and their 5-year-old was asleep when the 5-year-old never goes to sleep until, that they can't get them to bed. Right. Well, yeah, 5-year-olds can't go to sleep if the adults around them are jacked up.
Yeah.
So as they begin to relax into those high demand situations in their lives, they start finding themselves able to be self-efficacious, that they aim themselves to be this way, and they come out of that situation, look back on it and go, yeah, that's how I want to be. And that, for somebody that's been in an habitual breach, it just lights focus up. And what's happening that whole time is they're doing exposure paired with relaxation. So the trauma is diminishing, but we're not even talking about that, because what we're talking about is their life getting better and better and better and better. Right. And what they got to do for their life to get better and better and better is the same thing that heals the trauma. They only know about the trauma symptoms when we measure them. They don't even talk about them anymore, because they're moving towards who and how they want to be, and they're excited about it. And so therapy, instead of being something that's just arduous and, I hate that, it's exciting, because mostly I spend, 40 minutes hearing stories of success from people in my sessions about how jazzed they are and how well they're doing in those situations.
And who they're becoming.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, well, that is beautiful.
Wow.
Well, this has been so amazing. Thank you so much for sharing. Can you tell us where people can find you? Where are you hanging
Uh,
out virtually right now?
in esteemable places at this junction. And wasn't always the case. I was a musician for a long time, so that I have spent my time in some darker places, my earlier life, but not anymore. You can find me at forward-facing.com. That's our website. My email is eric@forward-facing.com. And those two resources will get to you. If anything that was intriguing for you, after hearing this, I have a YouTube channel that you can it's under my name, J. Eric Gentry, PhD. And there's just, I don't know, 50 or 60
there. Yeah.
There's lots of free videos on that you can make yourself make available to you. And, if I can be of service to anybody listening to this, then reach out to me and I'll do whatever I can to be helpful.
That's awesome. And I know you said you have a new book coming out relatively, or I guess you're finishing it off. I don't know how soon it will come out, but
just published one last month. That's pretty exciting. It's more of a textbook. It's called Trauma Competency for the 21st Century, and it's kind of looking through the stuff that I talked about in the first part of this talk about using the active ingredients and how to deliver those to clients in more of a traditional psychotherapy approach, but slated to be released this summer. I have forward-facing trauma therapy for the layperson, and that will be called Forward-Facing Freedom. And we've been fighting on the subtitle, and the subtitle now is Healing the Past, Transforming the Present, and a Future on Purpose.
Oh, that's nice.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I can, tell people to run out and get the book, because like I said, I've been reading the forward-facing trauma therapy. It's just amazing. And so I think it is important as lay people. Like you said, there's nobody who's escaping this. And, the more we can help ourselves, help our partners, help our children, the better off we're all going to be. We can all walk around doing the wet noodle with each other.
And co-regulate.
And yeah, and what's really cool about that, Aaliyah, is something that you mentioned earlier, is that the way that we serve all those people is that we keep ourselves in a regulated autonomic nervous system. So it's kind of back to the old put your mask on first thing, so that I'm in optimal shape, that I can then bring the best of myself to those relationships. And alpha safe, pack safe.
Yeah, I love that.
Uh-huh.
Thank you so much.
You are welcome so much.
Yes, thank you.
All righty. That was amazing.